Watching the Dow right now for what the early impact could be of Wednesday's reciprocal tariffs. The Dow takes the temperature early for what the president calls Liberation Day on Wednesday. So as consumers brace for rising prices, especially for cars, here's what the president had to say about the number of countries that could be affected.
On the tariffs that you're planning, so you're expecting to hit something like 10 to 15 countries, is that right?
No.
All of the countries. Is it across the board?
Not 10. I don't know who told you 10 or 15 countries.
We heard that. So we heard that you were going to aim for the 15%.
But you didn't hear it from me.
Okay, so how many countries will be in that initial tranche?
You'd start with all countries, so let's see what happens. There are many countries.
On the Russia?
I haven't heard a rumor about 15 countries, 10 or 15.
So you're starting with all countries?
Well, essentially, all of the countries that we're talking about. Wouldn't be talking about all countries. It's not a cutoff. And if you look at the history and you look at what's happened to us, you go to certain places, go to Asia, and you take a look at every single country in Asia, what they've done to the United States in trade. And by the way, in military in a certain way. You look at, take a look at trade with Asia, and I wouldn't say anybody is treated as fairly or nicely, but we are going to treat them. We're going to be much more generous to them in terms of heart. We're going to be much more generous than they were to us.
All right, so we got to twist the dials there to make sure that you can hear that next time. Our apologies for that. What was happening there is the president was asked there aboard Air Force One about how many nations to be affected. Willie James Inman joins us now from the White House. He was asked about 10 to 15 nations and then started to elaborate on other tariffs, especially as they pertain to Asian nations. Willie, what more do we know as we look at Wednesday and what is coming this way by way of tariffs?
Hey there, Reed. Good to be with you on this Monday morning. A little hard to hear there on Air Force One, but as you mentioned perfectly, the president summing up his tariff plans, what he is labeling as Liberation Day, that plan that the White House has talked about, putting reciprocal tariffs. Now, that would mean putting tariffs on a range of goods, a range of different trading partners. Now, the 10 to 15 number is essentially something that administration officials have talked about publicly. Those nations that have the largest trade deficit, 10 to 15 or so nations with the United States, putting a focus on those nations. But the president disputing that and saying essentially that you start with all nations here with those reciprocal tariffs, but leaving a little bit of wiggle room, saying that the United States won't necessarily treat these countries worse than they have treated the United States. But these reciprocal tariffs set to go into effect on Wednesday. We have limited details about the percentages and the countries, but the White House is looking to a report that will be provided tomorrow, and that's when we'll perhaps get a little bit more information in terms of how these tariffs will play out, as President Trump says it, amongst all of those nations that have levies against the United States. Reed.
Willie, I've got to ask you, a reporter for CBS in Northern California over the weekend sort of took the temperature of people who are out to buy a car. Probably didn't want to buy a car until spring, but at one dealership there was a line there of people wanting to test drive a car, anticipating further tariffs on automobiles. What else could be coming Wednesday?
Yeah, that's right. Those auto tariffs that the president promised just about a week or so ago are set to go into effect. A 25% tariff on foreign-made automobiles. I'll note that foreign parts are oftentimes oftentimes used to make not only American vehicles but also foreign vehicles as well. But the president over the weekend was asked about this. He was asked about whether or not he would be okay with the prices rising. He said he hopes they raise their prices because if they do, people are going to buy American-made cars. And the president went on to say, I couldn't care less if the prices on foreign cars go up. They're going to buy American cars, saying essentially that consumers are going to buy American if this indeed does happen with those tariffs being levied on those cars. Typically, you do see the cost, the prices rise. The costs are oftentimes passed on to the consumer. There's certainly concern there, as you mentioned, perhaps some buyers looking to buy sooner rather than later ahead of these tariffs going into effect, Reed.
All right, so that's the headline going into this week. But over the weekend, the president made other headlines. You know, a lot of people have heard him joke about a possible third term before and said that's just bluster. That's just President Trump being President Trump. But he this time said there are ways to do that. What does he mean there?
Yeah, well, the president, in flirting or talking about running for a third term, the Constitution, I'll point out, forbids that. The 22nd Amendment specifically, and I'll read that text for our viewers. It says, "No person shall be elected to office of the president more than twice." President Trump, of course, has been elected to the office of president twice. So you would need a constitutional amendment. You'd need an overwhelming majority of Congress. You'd also need buy-in from the states as well. So it's unclear if the White House is talking about a potential path here, but the way to do it is extremely difficult and perhaps unlikely. A lot of political observers will tell you that. But still, nonetheless, the president essentially saying that he's potentially serious about this. You have allies of the president talking about this as well. So for now, the president, he did mention this over the weekend that he's focused on this term, this current term, since it's very early in his second term, but still nonetheless flirting with this idea of running for president again for a third term, though, Reed.
Against what the Constitution says. Willie James Inman, live from the White House, thank you so much.